Hi, I'm Doug Newnham, the IT Manager of Tasty Fresh Food Co. In this session, I'll explain how I use Claris Connect to solve a problem with our contactless receipts in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis. I'm Doug Newnham, and I work for Tasty Fresh Food Co. And this is my current COVID-19 mask. Who am I? Well, I'm the IT Manager at Tasty Fresh Food Co. I love databases, and I even do JavaScript development in my own time because I am a JavaScript wannabe. On the right is some code I've stolen from someone else, and that's actually Pac-Man running in a web viewer using JavaScript libraries. Absolutely incredible when I found that, but I had to do it because I am a PC gamer and also a guitarist. I will not feature any of my guitar work because I want you to stick with this presentation. How I'd like you to leave this session is absolutely inspired not because it's particularly clever, but it does utilize so many different facets of FileMaker's brilliant integration capabilities, from SQL integration right the way through to using Connect to finish it off. This all started back in January 2020 when none of us had any idea that we were about to enter the biggest year of our lives. Mel Berger, our National Operations Manager, was talking about something that happened on the weekend, and she just asked me a simple question. Is there any chance we could text our customers receipts like they do at the hardware store? Now, we run an Android operating system for our point of sale. We run it on Zebra ET55 tablets. So we have a bespoke software that runs our point of sale. So we do have the option of developing that using our own development team.
So what will you learn from this session? We're going to go quickly through FileMaker and SQL Server integration. Taking HTML and converting it to a JPEG using Phantom.js Cloud API. Connecting FileMaker and Twilio using Claris Connect. I'm going to take information into FileMaker and also send information out of FileMaker. Using FileMaker to send an MMS using the Telstra SMS API. And we're going to see how we use Twilio to determine the carrier that a mobile number is using. And to finish it off, we're going to connect Twilio to Slack using Claris Connect. But before we go any further, I think it would help if you understood exactly how Tasty Fresh Food Co. works on a day-to-day basis. So my friend Belinda is going to take you through what it's like to serve a couple of customers each day at Tasty Fresh Food Co.
So hopefully that gives you a picture of how quickly we move between our customer stops, because each of those stops amounts to 5 minutes or thereabouts, and we do about 60 to 70 of those a day per run, and we have now 160 different runs around the country. So let's just go back to the requests for the contactless receipt. It wasn't actually put to me at the time as a contactless receipt. It was merely to address the fact that it's not a very professional looking receipt, and it certainly is not actually a legal invoice in the Australian business environment. So it's not actually a tax invoice. It doesn't detail the product. There is a total on there, but it doesn't indicate GST or our goods and services tax, equivalent of sales tax in the United States. And it also is time consuming. Now, add in what happened in March, around the 16th of March, where the pandemic of COVID-19 took off, and there was a major push to decrease the amount of contact between people. Obviously, we had social distancing rules that were put in place, and if you're handing over a receipt and you've been physically touching the piece of paper, it really is another source of potential source of virus transfer. So we had to accelerate that. Whilst the point of sale Android modification was well underway, I had not actually addressed the issue of sending out the receipts via an MMS. So I had to consider very quickly how that was going to happen. We accelerated the deployment of the updated point of sale. So all of the devices actually had the capacity to record a phone number and transmit that to SQL. But we desperately needed to get the integration with FileMaker and the Telstra MMS gateway, or SMS gateway. We had to get that operational. So that's where FileMaker certainly excelled in terms of rapid development. So let's take a look at the contactless receipt workflow, just to give you an overview of what's actually happening behind the scenes. And then we'll go on and we'll show a video on what's happening from the customer experience side of things. So the first thing that happens is a customer makes a purchase. Obviously, in this case, it's a burger. They provide their mobile number to the operator. The point of sale then transmits that to our SQL server. FileMaker is continuously polling a receipts table. When it sees new entries for the day, it actually swings into action. It generates a HTML receipt. And the question about generating a HTML receipt, or actually transmitting the HTML receipt, is that MMS requires a JPEG or a PNG. And the best way I found in doing it rapidly, bearing in mind I had very little time to do this, so the fastest way I could find was to use Phantom.js Cloud API to transfer a HTML document into a JPEG and send it back into FileMaker. There may be other ways of doing it, and I'm happy to entertain any of those options if anybody wants to submit suggestions on how to do this in a faster and more efficient way. But this was something that I knew how to do. And the other thing about Phantom.js Cloud is that if you're trying to, say, for example, print a web viewer, that can be quite problematic in FileMaker. So this is a great technique to actually get your hands on. So the JPEG pops back into FileMaker. Then we use the Telstra MMS or SMS gateway to transmit that JPEG back to the customer who provided the mobile number in the first place. And then they get this much more efficient and professional looking receipt, which actually has the detail of the purchased items, the sales tax included, totals, reference numbers, and an email address to follow up with our accounts department if they needed more information. As I said, what is happening behind the scenes is quite complex. It's just interesting, I think, to see it from the operator's point of view, so from our salesperson's perspective, and how that ends up in the hands of the customer from start to finish. So please take a minute, watch the next video, which shows our Android point of sale and the integration that ends up with a nicely formatted JPEG receipt on the user's phone. So that gives an indication of what the customer experience is like. They pass over their mobile number and they receive an MMS with an attached image that gives their tax receipt. Much better than having to wait for a piece of paper to be written out and handed to them, particularly in the COVID normal environment. So with the SQL server-side import progressing, FileMaker is constantly scanning and looking for new requests. At the point where it finds a request, it will create a record that will construct using an HTML calculated field, or a calculated field that generates the HTML. You can see in the yellow highlights there, I have on the left-hand side the HTML, on the right-hand side we have the CSS to generate the receipt image. We substitute in the mobile number, you can see that highlighted, and another calculated field, table content, which is the item by item list of the purchases made by the customer. There's the HTML that would be generated, and on the right is the JPEG that was created by transmitting the HTML to Phantom.js Cloud, the API of Phantom.js Cloud, using a technique that was documented by teamdf.com. There's a blog there, a link to that, with full credit to Daniel Wood, who takes you through the process of how to use Phantom.js Cloud to capture websites, or in this case, some simple HTML generated on FileMaker and then transmitted to the API. So the system worked very well. Then we had a first and second customer report of not receiving a receipt. A little bit of investigation uncovered that the common link was that their carrier was Vodafone. We checked with the Telstra SMS API team, support team, and they could not identify why the Vodafone users were not receiving the text messages. Further testing on known users of Vodafone within our own business verified that they were simply not receiving the MMS. The quick fix was to create an email version of the same receipt and then link that to the mobile number. So when the system sees the mobile number, it converts it to essentially an email and a PDF attachment. And again, that worked well. However, the downside of that was that it required every single operator who was asked for a receipt to note down the email address if the user was a Vodafone. So that entailed a very time-consuming process of asking who the carrier was and so forth. It ended up being a horrible customer experience. While we're trying to come up with a solution, one of the ideas we had was if we could identify the carrier before we even tried to send a text receipt. Some investigation initially uncovered that Twilio had an endpoint for that. Now, this was in the midst of the escalation of the COVID pandemic, so we had very little development time. So my immediate thought was to turn to Claris Connect, knowing that Claris Connect already had a connector for Twilio. So let's take a look at Claris Connect and what it can do with Twilio. If we look at Connect, you'll see you have your projects, and then amongst those projects there are workflows. In my initial investigation, of course, I started a new project. Let's just call this Engage. And I thought, if I want to start a flow and use the Twilio API in order to determine the carrier, I would have to start a flow. I'm going to call this carrier query. Create, and I'll choose the Twilio connector. And immediately you can see you can send an SMS, you can send a new incoming call, trigger, or conduct an outgoing call. There are no options for querying the carrier. So if we take a look at the Twilio dashboard and you scroll down to the API Explorer, you'll see that the endpoint does indeed exist, but currently not supported, and that is the lookup. And it's not supported by Connect yet. So I had to actually go back to a traditional API call using FileMaker in order to get the carrier. Let's take a look at that. Before we go into the detail of how we use FileMaker to determine the carrier of the mobile number, I'll just give an overview of the whole process that deals with this issue of one particular carrier not getting the MMS. Because we've seen how Connect does not quite yet have the support there for Twilio to send out the request to do the lookup. But let's go over the whole process. So there's an initial request from the Android point of sale. And now the request is made by FileMaker to the Twilio API to do the lookup to determine the carrier. If the carrier comes back as Vodafone, as determined by the Twilio API endpoint, an SMS is sent via FileMaker to the Twilio API using the phone number that's been set up as a dedicated receiving phone number within Twilio. Connect then receives the SMS via the connector, and the email is extracted and then permanently matched to the mobile number within FileMaker. So any subsequent receipts are immediately identified as Vodafone, and an email is generated rather than a text or an SMS, or MMS rather. And at the same time, we use Connect to send a notification to the IT team to basically indicate that something has worked, because we're very keen to hear that things have worked. And it's because we can. This Connect was so easy. You'll see how easy it was to connect up to Slack. So now let's delve into how FileMaker uses a Twilio API to determine the carrier of the mobile number. Now I'll just zoom in on this code a little. I won't spend a lot of time going through it. It is a curl call to the Twilio lookup endpoint. Remembering, of course, we could not use Connect for that, so we have to get a response back from that endpoint, which will determine the name of the carrier. Now, in Australia, it would be Telstra or Optus or Vodafone. Obviously, in the US, that would be any one of a dozen or half a dozen carriers. But in this case, if the carrier comes back as Vodafone, we will call a secondary script called SMS Twilio, which I have already open here. Very simple script. It takes the message that was sent. One point of note is that the from phone number is specified as part of the parameters of the call, and that is important when it comes to the actual connect step that we'll go through very shortly. We get back a response. At this point, there should be some error checking that hasn't been implemented yet, but we get a response back, which would be successful failure of message send. Now, the message that's actually sent is in JSON. Hello from Tasty, carrier records indicate that this number is with Vodafone. And we explain to the customer that we can't send their receipt, and we ask them to send the email address in that they would like their receipt emailed to. Before we get started with Connect, what we first need to do is create a dedicated phone number to receive text messages on. So if you go to your Twilio dashboard, and here you can also see the account SID and authorization token. We will need to come back to this area later. If you go to the dashboard and select phone numbers, and we want to buy a new number. As you can see, I've already got two phone numbers that we use for receiving text, and they already have webhooks created to receive text messages on. For this demonstration, we need to buy a new number. You can actually match it to parts of the number, so you can get a number that means something. So For this purpose, I'm going to use 2020 because 2020 is a memorable year and we want to be reminded of 2020 for time to come. So I'll pick a number. I'm going to pick this one here and we're going to buy that number. And it can take voice or SMS. So in this case, we're just going to use it for SMS. And we select business, go next. Now, here's what you need to have pre-created. You need to have a regulatory bundle created, which makes up of bills and other licensing information relevant to your country. And it's basically just giving approval for Twilio to allow you to send and receive text messages on this dedicated number. I was lucky enough in my case, I had already created that because it does take a few days to get the approval process. So now we have a number. And if you scroll down, you can see there's a place for the webhook for when the message arrives. So what we'll do now is we'll go back to Claris Connect and we'll create a new project and call that Engage. I'm going to create this in real time. So I'm going to create a new flow called Engage SMS Receive. And we'll select Twilio. And it's going to be an action. It's triggered by a new SMS. First of all, we need to sign into Twilio. So we need to get the account SID. Copy. Once we have that, we continue. Select the phone number we want to receive on, which generates a callback URL, which we can copy. We go to the number. We paste that information into the message comes in webhook area, and that's going to tell Twilio where to send the message receipt. So if we go back to Claris Connect now, and I'll initiate a text message to that mobile number, Claris is waiting for the trigger to fire. It fires, it now says the connection is complete, and we can save the trigger. And that is basically done. Now Claris Connect knows how to receive the text message. So we need to define an action that is carried out after the new SMS is received. So we'll add an action. We'll select FileMaker Server. And we're going to execute a script because we want to take the response and find the mobile number and match the mobile number to it. So hit continue. We need to connect to a new FileMaker Server account. At this point, I'll point out that you cannot actually put a space in here. If you have a space in your database name, I simply put in the %20. Maybe there's another workaround for it. But then once you've added that in, you can put a space in between the text. I'm sure you could put any other characters in there, and you can then insert a space, but you can't add a space to the end. Hit sign in. So I'm going to select this account. You can see one that I just matched previously and decided to back out of. In this case, we are going to run a script. You still have to select a name of a layout because it is using the data API in this process. And then we have a script name. which would be message response. In this case, I've actually got two message responses because you saw in my Twilio account there were actually two existing numbers where I've created two different workflows for two different reasons. In this case, we want to deal with the response from the customer, which should be their email address being sent back as a text message. So we're just going to select message response. And if you're familiar with the data API, this has to be passed as a string. And I simply pull out the response from the Twilio input, which would be, what I want is the body, which would be the text message. And you can see that's the test message that I sent to trigger the creation of the webhook. But I want the number. I'm just going to put a pipe character in because I can substitute that down the track. And we want the message, which in this case is the body. And we hit save. And just because we can, we're going to add another action. And in this case, I'm actually going to pull up Slack. I'm going to post a message to Slack. I won't create a channel or do anything else, just something very simple, because I want it to turn up in the IT department to let them know that there's been an addition of an email address, because at this stage we're still testing to make sure that we're passing email addresses correctly. So we want to know when somebody has actually submitted an email address to match to a mobile number. So I need to sign into Slack. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Sign into Slack. I'm going to allow Claris Connect to have access to my account. Obviously, I've signed into Slack already. Continue. I need to select my channel. In this case, I'm going to send it to Tech Products. And the body of the message is going to be, you have a new text message from, and I'm going to pull again the response from Twilio, and I'm going to, now I can find the number so much more easily. That is the phone number. I'm going to add in the body from the text message. There's the sample. Oops, I entered that twice. Let's just clear one of those out. There we go. We can name the bot. I'm going to call this Engage Connect. And we can pick a PNG. I'm just going to use the default Claris PNG. Save. Now what I need to do is enable the flow. And if I open up Slack and go into Tech Products, if I send a text message now to that same number, hello, engage audience. Not only is that record being sent into the FileMaker database, but it is also being sent into the Slack channel. So there you have it. From an Android device connected to an SQL server, connected to a FileMaker server, which is then subsequently connected to Twilio APIs, Phantom.js Cloud APIs, Telstra MMS APIs, to connect right the way through to Slack and then back into FileMaker. What seems like a very convoluted method of getting a receipt to a customer, but it did enable us to do contactless receipts. And all up, it really only took about 4 or 5 hours worth of coding to get it done. So we're able to roll it out extremely quickly, which meant that we could keep working all the way through our stage 3 restrictions. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed Claris Engage 2020.